Welcome to the Genealogy Happy Hour, a place where new family historians can learn to document their family histories and celebrate their new discoveries. I'm Amy.
And I'm Penny, and we're here to help you discover your family tree from the beginning.
Welcome to episode 53. Today, Penny and I will be talking with Libby Copeland about her new book, The Lost Family, How DNA Testing is Upending Who We Are. And of course, DNA is a very fast-growing segment of genealogical research, and Penny and I both have done some DNA testing, but I think sometimes people rush into this new technology not always understanding what the results are, and sometimes there are unintended consequences from those results. So this should be a very interesting discussion. But first, Penny, let's talk about the wine.
Well, the wine we have for this month is a Vinho Verde, or Verde, as they say in Portugal. And it's been warm here in Tampa these past few days, so it's always nice to have a lighter wine. It says it's a little fizzy. This is called Faisao, Faisao. It has a really pretty bird on the label. And the aromas are of green apples, tart pears, and ocean freshness, which is lovely. And I'm really enjoying this one.
Very good. All right, so let's get to our discussion with Libby Copeland. Welcome, Libby, to the Genealogy Happy Hour. Your book, The Lost Family, discusses the sometimes unintended consequences of the consumer DNA testing now being used very frequently in genealogy. Both Penny and I have tested our DNA, of course, and I will admit that when I got my results back, I quickly checked my matches to make sure all four of my grandparents' lines were represented in those matches, but some people are getting disappointing results. Some people are finding that they don't have the Native American ancestry that they thought they did. But for others, those DNA test results are literally life-changing. That they're getting some surprises in those DNA results, and your book sort of addresses that issue, and oftentimes people are left with a lot of questions and not knowing where to go get answers.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I was really interested in exploring from a cultural perspective as well as on kind of a personal level how finding out more about your ancestry and your family history can change your life, can enhance your life, can change your perspective, and particularly in instances where either some facet of your immediate family isn't what you expected, some facet of your own how you came to be, how you came into the world, or your understanding of your cultural history, your ethnic history, your ethnic ancestry. All those things I was sort of interested in how being able to access this information can really deepen people's understanding and also change their understanding of sort of where they came from.
Right, absolutely. I know last year I read Dani Shapiro's book Inheritance, when she talks about her story and her DNA testing and what happened to her, and then how she addressed all of the questions and the results that came up. But there's a lot of issues dealing with privacy nowadays, as well as what happens when you get results that you weren't intending or weren't expecting. Right. My family's always been my family, and I think people who are doing the DNA testing, people do it for different reasons, but oftentimes it's because they do have that what they feel is what they've been taught is a heritage that biologically may not actually be accurate.
Right, exactly. And then there's this kind of reconciling yourself with the past. And in the case of someone like Dani Shapiro, who I don't think I'm giving anything away by saying that she discovers very early on in the book that was conceived by sperm donation, right. A fact which she didn't know, and she's unable to ask her parents, questions that she would like answers to because they're not alive anymore. And so in a case like that, and in many cases that I explore in the book, you're not just kind of confronting maybe something you weren't told about yourself if you're the person about whom certain genetic facts were kept back. You're also looking at a kind of a different culture, the culture of the past, right? 60 years ago, we had different kind of rules and social conduct around things like donor conception, around things like adoption, around things like say a single mother raising a child on her own, things that now we have much more transparency about. And so when people ask questions and they're like, why was I never told? What they're also asking is how much has it changed from when from when I came into the world, and trying to wrap your head around something being not told to you for decades, when it seems like what now you could be told. But of course, once upon a time, people didn't talk about things that they talk about now. So it's really like a collision of the present and the past. And so some of this is almost a historical reckoning with the way things were done in the past versus how they're done now. And that's really interesting to me. I kind of wanted to explore that as well.
Libby, in your book, which I thought, for somebody who myself, I'm not a super science nerd, so I was, a little afraid of a lot of DNA scientific talk, but your book, the way you weave the stories and the scientific information is so readable and was so good. I read it in 2 days. I just loved it.
Oh my gosh. Thank you so much for saying that. That means so much coming from, someone steeped in this and a serious genealogist. So thank you.
Oh, well, you're welcome. I'm wondering, and I get the impression in your book from the stories that the people that you interviewed and the stories they tell, that they always seem to feel like no matter what the outcome was, it was a good thing to know. Am I getting that right? Or
yeah. So it's an interesting phenomenon. Early on, before I started writing the book, I talked to the genetic genealogist C.C. Moore. This was early in 2017, and she told me, I know this is going to sound strange, but over and over, the people that I've worked with have said that they're ultimately glad to know the truth, even when the truth is very painful. And I thought, wow, that's really interesting. And she, of course, had worked with many, 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 many people. And so as I was researching for the book, I would continually ask people this question, and it would vary depending on where in the process they were. Sometimes early on, they did not express that feeling, but then after they had processed the news, it was almost universal that when people discovered a fact that had great bearing on their own genetic identity or their own way that they came into the world, their own parentage, even when the truth was very painful, like, for instance, discovering that the man who raised you, who you're deeply bonded to, isn't genetically related to you. And maybe you're genetically related to somebody who doesn't want to have a relationship with you, which can be very traumatic. Even in those instances, people would tell me that they were glad to know. But I'll also say that this is not necessarily true for the people being sought out. So if you're somebody, you are that parent, for instance, who, the man who conceived a child didn't know it 55 years ago, or maybe you had an inkling, but now you're confronted with that through somebody who's messaging you through 23andMe messaging system and saying, "Hey, I'm your child." Those people are not always happy to know. In fact, those people sometimes delete their tests and walk away. The way you might kind of walk away from a grenade, because they always knew that this was something, and that it was something that they knew about all this time, that for whatever reasons they didn't want to tell their families about, or it's something they didn't know about, but it's deeply disruptive to, say, their relationship with the child that they raised in their marriage, or their relationship with their spouse. Yes. So it is true that the majority of people who discover something about themselves are ultimately glad to know, It's the people on the other side who are not always glad to be found. And that's sort of the tension that I found, which can be irresolvable. And it's one of the kind of central conundrums of the DNA testing age is how the interests of one person butt up against the interests of someone else, even though they're genetically, closely related. They're essentially strangers to one another. And unfortunately, sometimes they can see their interests to be like in collision with one another.
Yeah, you have a couple of really good examples in your book, some stories. So you've got the one story about Alice that goes through the entire book, like a continuity through the book. And then you've got some other stories interspersed there along with all the scientific information. And the one story, and I don't have his name written down, about the one man who thought he was Italian and
Rosario
lived his life as an Italian.
Yeah.
And then, surprise.
Yeah. I mean, for Rosario, Rosario believes that he is Sicilian because that's what his mother tells him, and he clings to it because it's incredibly important to have an ethnic identity. And he discovers through DNA testing that, in fact, his story, which is a not uncommon American story, is that he is something else, and he's been protected from that knowledge in a way. His mother chose to not tell him as her way of protecting him, so that he wouldn't face the discrimination that she faced. And when he learns, sort of the true ancestry, his true lineage, he's both incredibly glad to know, and it's very painful also to realize that, a few things, that he's invested in something that's sort of ethereal, right? He's invested in a cultural affiliation that in fact isn't really his to claim. And also that, that there's a lot of pain in his history, in his family's history, and that he now sees the world with different eyes. And he has to kind of reconcile himself to the American history of discrimination. So, that's a kind of an interesting scenario. It's not the most common scenario. And the most common scenario is, either discovering the most common kind of surprise that you can get from DNA testing is, finding that either you have a sibling or half sibling you didn't know about, or that you, are the product of an NPE, which can be translated variously to non-paternity event, or sometimes more commonly now, not parent expected. But there are cases like Rosario's where certain groups have, chosen to assimilate or to pass, and DNA testing shows us that history, and then really changes the lives of someone like Rosario, who now thinks of his place in the world in a completely new way.
Right. I mean, I think that really, when genealogy became very popular here in the United States, it was all about that reaching back to Europe, or reaching back to where your people came from, and very much keeping us in our own little box, our family's box. And now the DNA, and like you were saying, we're really having to rethink how we identify ourselves, how we identify with each other. And with adoptions now being more open, where 50 years ago they were didn't talk about it. People weren't told that they were adopted. So it's becoming. I mean, I guess maybe it's a good thing for us to start talking about it and looking at how we identify ourselves, and how we can respect each other's needs while trying to answer those own questions for ourselves.
I think that's a beautiful way of putting it. I mean, I think, the beauty of genealogy is that it makes the past personal, right? So, right. History can seem incredibly abstract. Yet when you discover that it was your ancestor, or your grandparent, your parent even, who went through something that, you learned about in school, but you didn't really relate to on a personal level. I feel like that opens up people's hearts. And I also think that, the stories that gave me the most hope when I was writing the book, that we could find a way to talk about these tensions in a way that will make things better for everyone, were the stories where people were sort of open-hearted when they could be, in terms of their reconciliation with the past and with one another. Now, that's not always possible. Sometimes, like, one person's narrative disrupts another person's narrative, if that makes sense. Like, your story about something that my mother did before I was born, giving up a child on a doorstep, is so painful to me in terms of what it tells me about my late mother, that I simply can't believe that we're relatives. And so I'm going to choose to deny the science of the 23andMe prediction or the ancestry prediction that says that we're half siblings. And it's certainly not for any of us to judge that response, because, man, what a traumatic and disruptive and painful thing for the person on the other side to learn. And yet, at the same time, in those instances when people can work their way around to it, you just, some of those stories make me cry. I have to say, they're so heartwarming about people, coming together, having spent their lives apart, and now they're together, and it's a mother in her 80s and a child in their 60s. And you say, goodness, their lives are so much richer. And I mean, the amazing thing about DNA testing is the way that, the things that we learn through it, and our understanding of ourselves, especially when it's a revelation of the kind that I'm writing about in the book. These are not things that go away after a year and you reconcile yourself to them and then you just kind of move forward. You are processing them, as far as I can tell, for years and perhaps for the rest of your life. I mean, I talk to people who had DNA surprises, going back to, say, 2010, 2012, the early days of autosomal DNA testing, and they're still working these things out. That tells me that this may go on, maybe a continual process, basically indefinitely. And I think that's a really important thing to think about, is how are these people going to be supported? What, for instance, can the mental health community be doing to help support people going through these experiences?
Right, absolutely. And when they get those test results back, you're alone in your home, and you've got so many questions, and intellectually and then emotionally too, that you have to process, that it has to be life-changing forever.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, like, you see the proliferation of groups to support people on Facebook. Like, there's so many of these groups, and some of them are, well over 100,000 people of, people who've experienced NPEs, foundlings, adoptees seeking their genetic kin or seeking to understand the search, donor conceived, all these people who've been affected by DNA testing and what it can reveal, or how it can connect us to family. That, for me, what's really interesting is that the primary support right now for people is through these Facebook groups, and not through, anything more formal. You start to see it a little bit. You're starting to see organizations crop up, a handful of them, and a handful of psychologists specializing in this, but it's still really at its very beginnings.
Really. Do you think that the DNA, the companies, when they started this, understood where this was going to lead?
That's a really good question. I interviewed Bennett Greenspan, who's the founder of Family Tree DNA, down in Houston. And he actually, by the way, founded his company, or at least I should say, sent out his first kits in April of 2000. So we're literally at the 20th anniversary right now of DNA testing for ancestry purposes. So that's really an interesting little fact. But he told me that he was doing proof of concept testing in 1999, and that he discovered a surprise even within that small cohort. So yes, in a sense they knew from the beginning, because he witnessed that. And then, continually the companies do get phone calls, and I'm sure they got them from the earliest days, from people being like, what do these results mean? This must be flawed. It's telling me I have a sister that I've never heard of, right? so yes, they must surely have known. And now they're at the point where they have special customer service like staff to answer these questions. And they have like 23andMe has a special page for navigating unexpected relationships. And it recommends that you can reach out to, online therapy apps and stuff like that. So it's not, it's not the majority of people, but it is a sizable minority. And I think that they have seen it as something that they deal with, but not, and they warn you about, but it's not their primary focus. Their primary focus is, or has been at least for most of the companies, with the exception of 23andMe, we're going to tell you more about your family history and your ancestry, and here's some cool stuff that can get you excited. And in fact, for the majority of people, that is how it plays out. They do kind of have this cool factor, but it's kind of not something that radically changes how they think about things, or poses a revelation in their immediate family that's totally upending their sense of selves.
Do you see more and more people having their DNA tested, or is it leveling off? Do you think it'll be most of us in the future?
Yeah. So, I'm sure you followed the news that there's been a slowdown in sales from the major companies, 23andMe and Ancestry. And there's been a couple of explanations for that. One explanation, which I think is probably the primary reason, is that they've simply vacuumed up all the early adopters. They've sort of gotten all the low-hanging fruit, the folks who are very interested in family history, or want to and can afford to give this as a gift for the holidays. And the other major concern, but I think maybe secondary to that, is a privacy concern. I think, there may be slower conversion rates for people who haven't already done this because there are questions about privacy. Possibly part of that is happening in the wake of the Golden State Killer case, but there are other privacy questions that people have around, issues like genetic discrimination and insurance and things like that. But what you've seen is a pivot from Ancestry and MyHeritage DNA to medical, health-related results and traits. And I think that's their effort to get more people. So I think that they will. I think that it's going to continue to grow. We're somewhere around 35 million people in the databases right now. And I think that when they pivot and try to appeal to people's interest in traits and wellness, you'll see more growth there. It may not be as fast of a rise, because there are these questions about how this information really does help you in your healthcare. I think that's a few years away from really being integrated into healthcare, or something that your doctor can use to help you. But nevertheless, yeah, I think it can only go up, and there could be a point in the future when the majority of us are have had our DNA analyzed in some way.
I know for me, the frustration is if you've had it tested with Ancestry or 23andMe, I mean, you almost have to test with both, because you can't upload your data to one or the other, but you can take your data from Ancestry and upload it to, say, MyHeritage or GEDmatch, and hope others have done the same thing to make matches. I guess that's a frustration, just that you have to test with a variety of different places to try to maybe make the connections that you're looking for. And I'm guessing that the people that you've talked to, I mean, have you noticed that have they had to test with a variety of places to find their answers?
Yeah, so that's something that has changed. So yes, early on, someone like Cece Moore would tell people to fish in all 3 ponds or all 4 ponds, depending on the year. So it would have originally been, say, Ancestry, Family Tree DNA, and 23andMe. And then MyHeritage came on the scene with their DNA testing in 2016, and then she was telling people to fish in all 4 ponds. More recently, she told me about maybe a year and a half ago that she had stopped telling people to do that because the Ancestry database was so large that they could simply test at Ancestry, and often as not, get a close enough cousin that they could unravel their, their genetic family tree from there. So that's like a really interesting thing. I think it depends, on your purposes. So if you're testing because you're, say, an adoptee looking for your birth parents, the identity of your birth parents, you might be able to get away with just testing an ancestry. But for a genealogist who wants to go really far back, and any lead is worth pursuing, because you're not just looking to answer one question, you're looking to answer many, many questions, then I could definitely see how testing in a lot of places makes sense. And I've certainly talked to people who've tested in all 4 places, and then even at other companies that don't exist anymore. Right. And I myself, my DNA is in three databases. So, yes, there's definitely like the people who are like the heavy users, and you see them show up over and over, and they're in GEDmatch too.
I like that, the heavy users. Yeah. That'd be me. I mean, I put mine anywhere, and I've been doing, as our listeners know, a lot of my French genealogy, and GeniaNet has also asked for everyone to upload their DNA there, and right in, I just stuck it in there, just hoping to get a French cousin match. But
where is that you said?
It's at GeniaNet.
GeniaNet.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Well, it's definitely, again, I went into it, knowing that, I'm pretty sure what my results were going to get, and the results I got were exactly what I had thought. But, and it doesn't really cross your mind at first that somebody might be getting information, test results that they weren't expecting. So, and certainly for adoptees, it's been a way for them to, a great resource for them to at least get some answers. But like you said, Libby, sometimes the person on the other side, the person that they discover is biologically connected to them, isn't as receptive. And you have to be able to find a way to reconcile that, and be respectful also of the other person. So
yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting. I also didn't expect anything unexpected when I tested, mm-hmm. and I didn't get anything unexpected when I tested. Mm-hmm. And but what struck me when I was interviewing people was how nobody expects anything unexpected, right? And the only difference is between us and the people who get something unexpected is that they got something unexpected. They didn't go in with an inkling of it. I mean, not to say that there aren't people who go in knowing they have a question. There are people who are looking for their genetic father. They know they don't know the identity, and they, are maybe an early adopter of this technology specifically because they're looking to find out. But the people, what's interesting about the kind of warnings that the companies give, they'll say, you may find out something unexpected about your family. Just, know that going in, you may, this may alter your sense of your place in the world. They give these warnings. 23andMe does, Ancestry does. And yet when I would talk to people who had tested, they were all just like me. They had not expected anything surprising. They knew the statistics in a vague way, like they knew that this happened, even if they didn't know how common it was. And yet they didn't think that it would apply to them, because you assume that you already know what there is to know about your family. And that's part of why it's such a kind of mind-blowing experience, because all of a sudden, it's not just you rethinking your present, you're rethinking your past, and you're going back, to age 10 and to age 6. And that thing my mom said to me that one time now sticks out to me and makes sense. Like people tell me about this, like reprocessing of the past. You're like excavating everything that ever happened. You're remembering things that you'd forgotten that suddenly take on a different meaning. So it's this really like wild experience to go through, and you went into it on a lark. Perhaps a lot of people say they went into it on a lark, just for curiosity, just for fun. It's this classic sort of like low bar, low cost investment with a massively kind of monumental outcome, and that mismatch is part of what makes people so unprepared to handle it. It's not like, there's a bioethicist who said to me, it's not like when you do genetic testing for medical results, to be worried, right? Like, you're gonna, I gotta find out if I'm, at risk for early onset Alzheimer's. Goodness, like, I'm biting my nails. It's so scary. I don't even know if I want to know the answer to this.
Right.
You don't know to be worried when you test into a tube. And like I've said, most people, aren't going to find anything surprising, but there's a very sizable minority of people who will. And for them, they're not expecting it when they spit into a tube.
Yeah. It's interesting. As a professional genealogist, I always incorporated some language into my agreement when I was doing research for someone. And, do you want to know if I find anything of any illegal activities or anything taboo or, any types of these things, do you want to know or do you not want to know? And, the client always says, yeah, I want to know everything. And because sometimes there are those secrets, like you said, those things that your mother or your father said or your grandmother said, and you want to know, well, I want to put that in better context. And there was a couple of clients I had who we found out some things that I think they suspected. They didn't tell me up front, but and then I recommended, ultimately DNA testing would give them a little better understanding of what the situation was. But those are people who are, like you said, already searching for some answers and some clarity in their family. But for many people, like you said, it's just a lark. I'm just going to put my DNA in there, and many more surprises now. That's for sure.
Yeah. Wow. It's interesting that most of them want to know. I think that you almost can't. It's hard to say no to that question, right? If somebody says to you, like, if I find something really surprising, will you want to know it? It's like, yes.
Right. Yeah.
And I think that's like really human nature to want to know. And I think that's part of why people say that they're really glad to know. Like, they look back and they're kind of almost pained at the notion that they spent all those years of their life not knowing something germane to their own identity. It's kind of torturous. Yeah. It's like how it's like you were blind, and then all of a sudden, you can see everything around you, and you're like, oh no, I'm okay, this is the truth of it, and goodness, it's not what I expected, but I would rather see the world with clear eyes. There's a beautiful quote from Catherine St. Clair, who founded NPE Friends Fellowship, which is an organization for people who've experienced NPEs primarily through DNA testing. And I'm probably going to mangle it. I know I'm mangling it, but it's something along the lines of, I would rather know a difficult truth than a comfortable lie. Something like that. Mm-hmm. And I think that puts it really well.
Yeah.
I like that.
That's good. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Libby, for talking with us. And it's been fascinating. It's a fascinating book. We'll have a link to it called The Lost Family. We'll have a link to it on our website. What, Penny?
Yes, we will.
Thank you. I'm glad you liked it. I'm really thrilled to get to talk to both of you. This is really, really an honor. So thank
Libby,
you.
I've got one quick question. I'm just curious that since you've spent all this time immersed into the DNA world and whatnot, are you going to continue with any other project on this, or are you moving on to something else? And
I'm not sure. It's a good question. I'm still sort of like writing about it. I'm still thinking about it. I've got a couple of op-eds that I'm doing. So yeah, right now I'm still really thinking about it and talking to people and trying to think my way through sort of the deeper implications of how this is changing the family.
Yeah. Well, keep going, because we really love your writing. It's so good.
Great discussion.
Oh, thank you so much. I really appreciate that.
Great discussion. All right. Well, thanks, Libby, and have a good day.
Okay. All right. You too. All right. Bye.
We hope you enjoyed our discussion with Libby Copeland, the author of The Lost Family, and I hope you can run out and get that book because you can learn so much about DNA and how it is affecting our world and society and individuals. It's absolutely fascinating. So until next time,
Cheers!
cheers!
Thank you for listening. Please email us with any questions or comments at genealogyhappyhour@gmail.com.
Visit our website, www.genealogyhappyhour.com, for additional resources, books, and wines. Don't forget to drink responsibly
And never drink around genealogical documents.